Hi everyone, we're continuing our series of beginner chess videos on my chess notebook, and the purpose of this video is to describe what check and checkmate are and how a game of chess ends with a winner. So here you're looking at the starting position, and the players will take turns making moves, and they'll probably be capturing each other's pieces. Usually in a game of chess, the more pieces you take of your opponents and the more pieces you keep yourself, the better off you are. However, the object of chess is not to take all of your opponent's pieces. Rather, the object is to capture their king. The king is of the utmost significance in chess. So white is after that piece right there, the black king. And if he wins it, he wins the game regardless of how many pieces he has left or how many pieces his opponent has. So how do you win the king? Well, first you have to be able to attack it. You have to be able to threaten to capture it. And when you make a move that threatens to capture the king, that move is called a check. Let's look at some examples. So here it's white to move, and white can move their rook in a straight line to check the black king like this. So that's called a check because if it were white's next move, he would be able to move directly to the left and capture the black king. So the king is being threatened. We call that a check. Now when you're playing a game live with a person in real life, you can announce check. You can say the word out loud. Usually it's a good idea for beginners to do that, to alert each other to the fact that they see the check. But more advanced players won't say the word at all because it's automatically just something the players will see. Okay, check, by the way, does not get you any points or any merit at all in a game. It's not going to win all by itself. That's what checkmate is, and we'll look at checkmate later. Let's look at another check from the beginning of this position. Do you see another way the white rook can check the black king? Yeah, it can move directly to the left over to here, and that's called check because it's threatening to win the black king. Let's take a look at some checks with a bishop. This bishop can check the black king in two different ways. See if you can visualize both ways of checking the black king. Okay, one way to do it is to move it here. Remember, bishops move on a diagonal. That's a check. It's threatening to win that king. Or another way to do it is to move it over here. That's also a check, threatening to win that king. Okay, let's look at another position with a knight. This knight can check the black king also in two ways, and it's a little tricky. It's hard to get used to that L shape of the knight. But this knight can move in an L shape like this and land on that square, and that's a check because it is threatening that black king. If it had another move, it would take that king and win the game. There's another way to check the black king. Do you see it? Okay, the other way to do it is to move it in an L shape like this and land right there. That's also a check because it is threatening to win that black king. Okay, you can check with a queen. In fact, try to find all of the checking moves you can make with that white queen. Maybe pause the video and count them. Okay, hopefully you found all four checks. Let's see what they are. Well, the queen can move in a straight line horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. So it can move diagonally to here, land on that square, and that's a check. It's threatening to win that black king. Okay, another check is to move it forward to here, and that's a threat to win the king as well. That's a check. Another check is to move it forward all the way to the back row here. That's a check. Okay. And there's one more check. Do you see the last one? It's kind of tricky, but you can move it directly to the left over to here. That's a check because it is threatening to win that black king. Okay, you can also check with a pawn. So white is moving up the board. The pieces started out at the bottom, so the pawns are moving forward. And this pawn can check the black king by moving 2 squares. Remember that rule, on its original move it can move either 1 or 2 squares. And that's a check because pawns capture in this manner, 1 square ahead diagonally. So the king is under threat. Okay, let's talk about what you do when you are in check. Well, the good news for beginners is you cannot accidentally lose a game of chess by just not noticing you're in check and getting your king captured. It doesn't work like that. The rules of chess state that if you are in check, you must get out of check if possible. So you're not allowed to end your turn with your king in danger. You must not allow your opponent to take your king. It's simply illegal. So there are different ways to get out of check we'll discuss. So in this position, suppose black moves his rook straight down here and it says check. Okay, it's threatening to win the white king. Well, one way to get out of check is to move your king to a safe square where it's not being threatened. There are 4 different squares that king can consider moving to. One of those squares, kings only move 1 square at a time, and it cannot take its own piece. But only one of those squares is safe. Do you see which one is safe? Okay, the king cannot move here because the rook is still attacking it on that square. Same thing with that square. The rook has that covered as well. Now, the king cannot move here. You cannot move your king here because that is under attack by the black king. Which brings up an interesting point. In chess, the 2 kings must always have at least 1 square separating them. They cannot reside on adjacent squares because they would be checking each other. Okay? And you're not allowed to move into check. So the only safe move here is to move over there. And that's how you would have to move in that position, and that gets you out of check. There are other ways to get out of check. Look at this position. Suppose black moves the rook sideways over here and calls check, threatening that white king. Well, the white king has nowhere to run to. There's only one open square, which is right in front of it, but that's covered by the black rook. But there is a way for white to move so that at the end of his turn, he's no longer in check. Do you see what the move is? Yes, white can capture the black rook with his bishop. And once he does, the rook is no longer checking the white king, so white got out of check. There's yet another way to get out of check. Let's look at this position. Suppose it's black's turn, and black decides to move his queen, and he moves it on a diagonal, like that, right to that square. And that checks the white king. The white king has nowhere to run. All 3 of these squares would be under attack by the black queen. And none of white's pieces can capture the black queen either. But white can still get out of check. There's one way to do it. Do you see what the move is? That's correct. White can move his knight in the shape of an L to this square right here. And that, we say, blocks the check. So we put a piece in the way so the black queen is no longer threatening the white king. So in general, there are 3 ways to get out of check. You either move your king to a safe square, you take the piece that's checking you, or you block the check by putting something in between the checking piece and your king. Okay, let's look at this position. And suppose it's white to move, and white moves his knight in an L and ends up right here. Now that checks the black king. It's threatening to win the black king. I wanted to point out that it is not possible to block a knight. So for example, you would not be allowed to move your bishop to this square to resolve the check. You would still be in check because knights can jump over pieces. So the only way to get out of this particular check in this position is to move your king. And the king could either move here or it could move here safely. And it's no longer in check. All right, and there's another funny thing that sometimes happens. It's a little rare, but look at this position where it's white to move. Let's say white decides to move his bishop to this square and checks the black king. So the bishop is attacking the king. Hold on a second though. Look at the white rook. What is the white rook doing? That's right, the white rook is also attacking the black king. There are two pieces checking the king. Even though white only moved one piece, this can happen, and the reason is that bishop was at the moment blocking the white rook. So right now, nothing is checking the black king, but once the bishop moves here, now two pieces are. This is known as a double check. It doesn't have any significance with regard to the rules. We simply say the black king is in check in this position, and he has to get out of check. But double checks are special because they're very hard to get out of check. You cannot take the bishop to get out of check because the white rook would still be checking you. You cannot take the rook to get out of check because the white bishop would still be checking you. You can't block the bishop because the rook is still checking you. And you can't block the rook because the bishop is still checking you. So when you're in a double check like this, the only way to get out of it, if you can get out of it at all, is to move the king. So the king could move here, and that would be safe, and he's no longer in check. All right, so let's take an example and count how many ways we can get out of check. Let's say it's black's move, and black moves his rook here and calls check. So the white king is in check right now. And white has to get out of check by the rules of chess. You're not allowed to have your king commit suicide. It has to find safety. So pause the video and count how many legal moves white has. That means how many different ways can he get out of check. Okay, hopefully you found 5. Did you find all 5 ways to get out of check? Okay, let's find out. So first of all, you might move the king to safety. There's one way it could move. There's another way it could move. That's 2 moves so far to get out of check. Note it cannot move forward because the rook would still be attacking it. So there are 2 ways the king can move. But another way to get out of check is to capture that rook that's checking you. So that's 3. And yet another way is to block it. And you can block it 2 ways. You can block with this bishop, that's getting out of check, and you could even block with the knight down here in this L shape. So that's 5 total ways to get out of check. All right, well, what happens in a position where you're not in check? Well, if you're not in check, you have a lot of freedom. You can move a lot of your pieces. But you have to be careful not to make a move that exposes you to check. If you do, it's an illegal move and your opponent should point it out and tell you to take the move back. You have no penalty for doing so, but you should keep your eyes open. So, for example, in this position, can you think of some moves for black that are illegal? Okay, well, one move that black is not allowed to make is to move his king forward. And the reason he can't do that is because the white bishop here would be checking him. You can't move into check. Another illegal move would be to move this knight. If you try to move this knight, for example, to take this pawn, that is illegal. You will not be allowed to do that because then that exposes a check from this bishop. Okay, that knight cannot move because the bishop would take the black king. It would be putting it in check. That knight is said to be under a pin right now. It's pinned in place. And we're going to talk more about pins and other related topics in a future video. So you're not allowed to make moves that put you into check, even if you're not in check at the moment. You can make plenty of other moves. You can do this. You can do this. You can do this. A lot of moves you can make. All right, so the last thing we have to talk about is checkmate. Well, the idea of checkmate is simple now that you know about check. You can checkmate your opponent by putting them in check in such a way that there is no way to get out of check. So if you put your opponent in check and they have no legal moves, then that is called checkmate and you've won the game. That's the object of the game. It's like cornering your opponent's king. It's like getting it down to the point where you would capture him, but you just admit it's over, the king has no escape, and the game ends before you actually capture the king. So here it's black to move, and black has a checkmating move. Okay, black can take this rook, move straight down, and capture the white rook. That checks the white king. Now let's check to see if white can get out of that threat. Well, the white king cannot move here because the rook would still be checking it, and it can't move there for the same reason. Do you see why the white king cannot move up there? That's right, it's because the black bishop has that square controlled and you can't move where that bishop can take you. You can't move into check. So the king cannot get out of this check. You cannot capture the rook that's checking you, and there's no piece to intercede either. So that's checkmate, and black has won the game. Let's see another checkmate. So here it's white to move, and white has one checkmating move. It's an advanced question, but I'll ask anyway. Try to find the checkmating move. Maybe pause the video and try to find it. Okay, the one move that checkmates here for white is to take this knight, move it here. Now that's a very interesting move because it's moving away from the king. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with checkmate, but it does because it just released an attack by this rook on that king. That knight was in front of the rook, so nothing is checking the black king now. But now when the knight moves out of the way, it releases this check by the white rook. People call that a discovered check, okay, but it's not important to remember that for now. So can black get out of that check? Well, let's see. It can't move here or here because the rook still has those squares covered. But it can't move here either because the white bishop has that square covered. And there's no way to capture the white rook that is checking the black king, and there's no way to put a piece in between to block the check either. So that's checkmate. Okay, there's no legal move for black, so white has won the game. Let's see another checkmate. Okay, here in this position, white can checkmate black in 5 different ways. Let's see if we can find all 5 checkmating moves. Now, the white king cannot call check. A king can never do that because if you move the white king forward, it would be putting itself in check because the black king could take it, and you're never allowed to put yourself in check. So remember what I said earlier, the kings always have to have a square separating them. They can't be next to each other. But we're going to deliver a checkmate with the queen. And one way to do it is to slide it to the left all the way to the edge of the board here. That is checkmate. The reason it's checkmate is because it's threatening the king, so that's check. And there's no way to move away from the queen's influence. Can't move to the right. The queen has that square covered. It can't move up here to the right. The queen has that square covered, as well as the king. And it cannot capture the queen either, because it can't move to that square. The white king has that square covered. And we say that the white king is supporting the white queen. So that would be checkmate. Another way to checkmate is to slide it to the left right there. That's a similar checkmate. The black king cannot get away. You can checkmate from far away. You can go forward here. This is a checkmate. Let's see. The black king cannot go to these squares because the white king has those squares covered. It's defending those squares. And it can't go here either because the white queen has that square covered. Okay, and there are similar checkmates. You can move up to the left, and that's a checkmate. or up to the right, and that's a checkmate. So a lot of ways to checkmate in that position. Now what is not a checkmate is this checking move, all the way down to the left here. That's check, but not checkmate because the black king can move to the right and get out of it. Okay, let's see another checkmate. Okay, in this position, white can deliver a checkmate with his knight. Okay, and there are two ways to do it. Okay, you can move the knight here in this L shape, and that checks the black king because it's under attack by that white knight. And the black king has no safe square to run to because these two squares are covered by this bishop. The bishop would be attacking the king if it went to one of those squares. Okay. Also, the knight cannot be captured. Rooks don't move in a diagonal, neither do knights can't move a square to the left. And you can't block a knight, so that's checkmate. There's another way to checkmate. You can move the knight over here and call checkmate. This is an interesting checkmate. The king still cannot move because of this bishop. But you may wonder, can the black knight capture that white knight? Well, no, because it is in a pin by this other bishop. It can't move because if it does, that would expose a check by that bishop and the king would get captured. So this is an example of a checkmate. So that's how a game of chess ends. It ends in checkmate. All right, thank you for watching the video, and I look forward to making more of them.